If psychology and pop culture had a baby, they'd call it Shrink Tank.
A new paper reveals more intelligent people are quicker to learn and unlearn.
90% chance that there's some weird animal out there. Yeah.
Stern's been doing this forever, and far more extreme. From Nashville and Charlotte, this is the Shrink Tank Podcast. Welcome, everybody. If you're joining us for the first time, a very special welcome to you. If you're coming back for more, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Dave Verhagen here in Nashville. We've got a great show for you. Our trending topic today is evangelicals and Trump. That's a hot one. We'll talk about that in our second segment. But first, let's meet our Charlotte panel. Dr. Emma Kate Wright is here. Emma Kate, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Hope you are.
Since we're not going to get a chance to do a show on this probably because the summer's underway, I wanted to ask you if there's any movie that you're particularly looking forward to this summer.
Ooh, yes. I am so excited for Incredibles 2.
Me too.
I loved the first one. And so when I heard this was coming, I was like, yes. And I saw the preview and it looks awesome. And I can't wait.
Yeah, that's number one on my list for sure. And Dr. Frank Gaskell's with us. Frank, how are you?
Doing well, David. How are you?
Pretty dandy. And I want to ask you about the same question. Any movie that you're looking forward to this summer?
There are actually two. One is a guilty pleasure. If it is Jurassic Park, I'm there. I'm beyond there. If it has a dinosaur, I'm all over it, and it can't be bad.
You're all over the dinosaur?
Yes.
Okay.
And the other one, which is already out, but I have not had a chance to see, I'm dying to see it, is Hereditary. It is going to be ridiculously terrifying, and I'm just very excited for a scary summer movie.
Sounds like boring.
What's the premise of that movie?
It's essentially there's a little girl and she's somehow related. I think it's her grandmother or somebody, and there's witchcraft, and she doesn't see her mom as her real mom, and she has all these witching powers. It's gotten some really cool reviews. I'm excited about it.
Very good. And Jonathan Hedderly is our certified Asian who rounds out the panel. Jonathan, do you have a movie in particular you're looking forward to?
Well, believe it or not, everybody has already mentioned the two that I'm most looking forward to. And I really, honestly, I think this summer looks to be a down year in terms of volume of films I'm strongly anticipating. But no, it's not Jurassic World, because that looks like the dumbest big budget movie this side of Transformers. But
Shut your
I probably
mouth.
will see it.
Shut your mouth.
Because I see dumb blockbuster movies like Transformers in the theater. But it really is the Incredibles 2. That looks phenomenal. I love the first one. And it was recently I became aware of Hereditary, and it looks so creepy, and it is getting crazy great reviews.
Toni Collette.
I believe The Guardian gave it 5 stars.
Wow.
And so they're saying it's easily by far the scariest film of the year, if not in several years, and it opened last week.
Yes, it did.
That's not creepy.
Guy Raz.
Well, that was plenty creepy. Each week, Jonathan trolls the internet, and he finds a great story of psychology in the news for our first segment that we call
Being Human.
Maybe some of you have heard about this story. The story of parents having to go to court to boot out their 30-year-old son from their home. In a real-life case of failure to launch, an upstate New York judge ordered a 30-year-old man to move out of his parents' house after they went to court to have him evicted. Michael Rotundo told the judge he knows his parents want him out of the split-level ranch they share, but he argued that as a family member, he's entitled to 6 months more time. The state Supreme Court Justice Donald Greenwood rejected that as outrageous. Mark and Christina Rotundo brought the court case after several eviction letters offering money and other help was ignored. So, Frank, what do you make of this family drama?
Well, the entire thing's a train wreck, but it is apropos, I guess, I'm probably using that word wrong, of our current times. Because this guy's being diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I don't know the reality behind all of that. He's shown some odd behavior. He has been fined and admitted guilty to stalking someone. But the thing that really disturbs me about this is he has some mental health issues for sure. He's shown prior poor judgment, and he owns a compound hunting bow and a 30-30 rifle. And the police said, we find no reason to take his gun away. I'm like, okay, here we go. We've got some variables to pay attention to. So let's just let this guy go on the street with $1,000 and let's see what happens. It disturbs me a great deal. I think the entire system is probably a mess, but it's very disturbing.
Yeah, I think this is just a sad story. Like, nobody looks good here. Like, the kid looks bad.
Oh,
because
he looks great. Have you seen his
30,
hair? Oh, man.
You know, he's got like a sweet neck beard and like he's just rocking it. And, you know, and then parents, it's like, wow, like, okay, what did you do parenting wise to get to this place? And, you know, okay, maybe there is some mental illness here that's going on that's affecting it. But still, like, you know, they've had to get to this place where they have to take their son to court to get him out of their own home. It's just very sad.
Well, I'll say this. I didn't know about the gun and the crossbow and all that stuff. But one thing that has bugged me about the story is that people are kind of painting this story as here's just another millennial who lives at home and all. That's not, I mean, that is very unfair to millennials, first of all. But there's clearly something wrong with the guy. I mean, there's clearly some mental health problems. So to kind of paint this as this is just sort of a story of our times of how, you know, these young adults don't grow up and they don't move out and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're missing some of the important parts of this particular story from the mental health standpoint, for sure.
I would agree with that, Dave. In nearly all circumstances, except when I lined this guy up next to our sound engineer, I find a lot of parallels that are also disconcerting. I think it's a good portrait of at least Sean Beck.
No, this guy's beard weighs more than Sean.
Yeah, Sean is very petite vegan, and this guy is meat eater, probably. So.
Yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah.
So there are lots of differences, is what you're saying. Lots. Well, if you have questions or comments, you can write us at feedback@shrinktank.com. Unless you're Sean, then please don't write us. Write us, and we will react to your questions and comments in a future podcast. And we're going to move to our trending topic, which is a hot one today. It is evangelicals and Trump evangelicals.
This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now.
And before we kind of dive into the psychology of all this, I know that one of the comments we got in the past was that we're all a bunch of liberals who bash conservatives and that sort of thing. So I want to ask you, as much as you feel comfortable, what is your kind of personal background with church and faith and that kind of thing, as much as you want to say? Emma Kate, do you want to share any of that?
Well, so just to give feedback to that, I hate talking about politics personally, but I know it's just what we have to do at this day and age because everything is so highly political. But to answer your question about religion, I did grow up in the church. I went to church whenever I visited my dad because I come from a split home, and my adopted mom. I did not go to church when I was living with her, but every weekend when I visited my dad, I would visit youth groups, and I really liked it. I thought, it was a really great sense of community. My dad and my mom, or my stepmom, have been really invested in their church for 20 years, and they made a big decision to switch to a new church, and that was not a decision they made very lightly. And so I think, I'm not necessarily the going to church kind of person at this stage of my life, but I am a very spiritual person.
Frank, how about you?
I would consider myself a born-again Christian who has a lifelong wrestle with my faith. But, I straight up believe in all the stereotypes of I believe in Jesus and forgiveness of sins and all that stuff. But politically, I do not match up whatsoever with the stereotype of evangelicals, and I don't think Christ matches up to them either.
Well, we'll get to that in a bit.
Okay. I'm chomping at the bit, Dave.
Chomping at the bit there, Frankie. Jonathan, how about you?
Well, I was forced to go to a very conservative fundamentalist church that I actively fought for years and years. And there was a number of incidences on my behalf that also may have involved water balloons and stink bombs that got me temporarily banned from my church, much to my delight. I had no
Shocking.
problems whatsoever. But it was actually in high school that I became more involved with Young Life, which is a Christian outreach organization. And I actually went to a Christian university. I have a bachelor's degree in biblical studies and theology. I was a full-time youth pastor for 5 years, my first job out of college. And I went to seminary and got a master's degree in theology and leadership. And that's also where I got my counseling degree. So I definitely have the religious and spiritual lingo.
Yeah.
I feel very comfortable talking about it, but I tend to be much more of a somebody that would describe themselves as spiritual and very comfortable with the unknown and even mystical aspects of spirituality versus pure dogmatic organized religion.
Yeah. And actually, you mentioned seminary. I actually taught at your seminary for a couple of years, not full-time, but on adjunct. I taught counseling there. And I've been involved in campus ministry when I was in college and all that. And I'm kind of like how Frank's describing, sort of there in terms of the doctrinal points, but also very far, certainly in recent years, very far from where the conservative branch of the church has drifted to. So let me hit you with a couple of thoughts, and then I want you guys to react to this, because there is a lot to talk about the psychology of this. And we want to be careful to say that we're not trying to bash evangelicals, and we're not trying to say that the evangelicalism is wrong or bad or anything, but really there is a psychology to it that's important to understand. 81% of evangelicals voted for Trump. Now, this is a guy who has been married 3 times. We could have a list of his behavior that in the past evangelicals would have not been super duper on board with in terms of backing of a candidate. And now the vast majority, about 75% of evangelicals, think he's doing a great job. Here's a couple shocking things. In 2002, evangelicals were the group most likely to say a person's moral character is relevant to their ability to lead in public office. That was in 2012. By 2016, they were the least likely. In other words, if you took the poll, you'd look at in 2012, they were like, yep, a person's behavior, their moral character, all that stuff is essential to them being a good leader. And then after Trump was elected, they were the ones that were like, nope, just kidding. Here's another thing. 68% of evangelicals say the U.S. has zero responsibility to accept refugees, and they're the lowest of any group. About 49% of all Americans say this in a recent poll. Evangelicals are about 20 points higher than that, which, again, one of the staples of evangelical faith has been kindness toward the poor and widowed and refugees and so on, and now that's kind of changed. What's going on here? Who wants to have at it first?
Well, one of the things I actually, when I was preparing for this, I saw that first statistic that you talked about in terms of how evangelicals viewed morality for a leader. And the thing that I can't help but ask myself, and I remember I really struggled with this during the election, was that we had 2 really crummy choices to vote between. And so it's all, my thoughts are, it's more or less, they knew that they had so much disdain and distrust for Hillary Clinton that they said, okay, we're going to go for Trump. And biblically, the Bible teaches that we're all flawed. And I think Trump has many, many flaws. But I guess they get behind him because he pushes a lot of, the more conservative agenda, in the sense that he talked a lot about, his attempts to kind of defund Planned Parenthood, and abortion, especially for Democrats, for a long time has been a really big push to legalize that and fight for that. And so when he, he kind of talked a lot about defunding Planned Parenthood, when the reality is Planned Parenthood doesn't actually get federal funding for abortions. And then, he's not an advocate for the LGBTQ plus community. And so, these are things that are kind of in line with the really conservative, traditional, faith-based things. And it's not to say that all religious individuals share that. And I think, even here on, our panel, we're kind of talking about that. But I think my opinion is that there was just so much distrust of Hillary Clinton that they said, okay, you know what? This is who we're going to go with because we think he's going to push our agenda the most.
Well, I think you've hit on this a little bit, but you could make the argument that we had two bad choices, and in the mind of the religious conservative, the evangelical, that he was the lesser of two evils. But support for him is at an all-time high among evangelicals, even though lots and lots of things have come out, and even worse things in some respects than before. And yet the support is really high. Frank?
Well, I would nuance that a little bit in that the favorability of Donald Trump among evangelicals is among white evangelicals is at 75%. And if we look at sort of, I'm going to paint with a broad stroke, so I apologize. If you look at white, rural, evangelical communities, then Hillary represented a feminist agenda that they're going to resist. They can also identify with the power of Trump, his reality TV show. They think they know him. But I was in preparing for this, it was really interesting. There have been a lot of articles written about this. And by supporting Trump, I feel like they have destroyed any moral authority that they could claim a decade or more ago. That it's Trump is antithetical to everything they believe. And the idea of saying, well, he's a flawed person and we give grace. Well, yeah, you give grace to somebody who's contrite, asked for forgiveness, shown repentance. He's done none of these things. He gloats about it.
Yeah. And there was not a lot of grace given to Obama or Clinton or
none
on the right. Jonathan, what's your take on what's going on here?
Oh, there's a lot going on. I mean, it is a hot mess.
It really is.
And one of the things that I would argue is that this is cyclical. This is not the first or the last time that people that identify themselves as religious or moralists have gotten into bed with corruption. And there's a number of reasons for that. I think Frank really touched upon something that I am in complete agreement with, which is really about predominantly white male evangelical Christians. Because if you look at Christianity, especially in America, it is very diverse. Catholicism, the Hispanic, the African American community, and they voted more for Hillary Clinton, and they historically vote more Democratic, even though on moral issues they may find themselves to be leaning more towards the conservative end. But here's one of the challenges when you think about the theology of politics, especially with white male evangelicals. Christianity is really one of the bedrocks is that it's a theology or belief system that one of its foundations is persecution and oppression. So you already very early on in your life adopt this mentality that we are persecuted and we are oppressed. Well, if you look at an African-American Christian or someone of a minority status in America, you can sincerely point to a number of areas to say that persecution and oppression is very real and I live with it every single day. The system is not set up for me to succeed. If anything, I have to work above and beyond the average person. But what happens when a white middle-class American adopts that principle of like, I'm oppressed and I'm persecuted? That doesn't really come across very empathetic. And if you think about liberalism, progressiveness, progress, it's really about changing and making things better. When you think about a lot of religious faith, the very definition of orthodoxy means to preserve the original creeds of a religion. And so there's this what I would call, and what's been coined, status anxiety among white male evangelicals, that progress really means losing their power and losing their status as the majority. Because if you think about what Hillary Clinton, or even recently after the election with the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter, it's all about raising up issues of the oppressed and the minority and the disenfranchised. And it's very difficult for a segment of our American population to not see that as threatening, because in order for them to progress, they think, and I think largely erroneously, that it means they're going to lose status and power and privilege. And so I think that's really where you have a large cultural war at bay. But we saw this with women's suffrage. We saw this with the civil rights. We saw this with slavery in the 1800s. Like, it's nothing new. By and large, historically, the Christian community do not change culture. They catch up to culture.
Well, I think you guys are hitting on a ton of points, and I feel like I've thought about this so much that my thoughts are not going to come out super clear. They feel like they're running in such like multiple directions at once. But I'll tell you some of the stuff that you guys have already hit on. I'll say in a slightly different way. One is that I think Trump is a classic authoritarian leader, and so evangelicals right now, because of what you're saying, Jonathan, are going for the guy that they feel like is the strong man that's going to sort of protect them and their way of life. They feel like they had their spot at the head of the table. They're losing that. The country's changing, and they need their strong man to kind of be the bully and stick up for them. And so there is a kind of a blind allegiance to that, and a willingness to overlook all the moral crap, because it's sort of like he's a guy who's going to duke it out for us, or at least he's going to stick his finger in the eye of the people that are trying to take our place at the table. Similarly, I think there is, as we've talked about before, our country is becoming increasingly narcissistic. There's been a 50-year study of incoming college students. Rates of narcissism have gone up steadily over 50 years. That's true of the kind of the country writ large. And I think evangelicalism is particularly prone to narcissism because it sort of breeds this, we've got a lock on truth, and we've got a lock on sort of what's right and right ways of thinking. And because of that, I think they tend to be drawn more toward narcissistic personalities as well. Trump's a classic narcissist. And so it's very, whether they realize it or not, appealing to them because it's sort of in step with how they tend to relate to the world themselves. A third thing I'd say is that the country, again, this is a case we've made before, has become increasingly less resilient because we haven't faced some of the challenges since World War II that previous generations have. We're a country that has become increasingly less resilient. And so that sort of breeds this idea that a white male can feel like they're in this oppressed minority status. There's not this sort of emotional sturdiness and grit when things start to change, when things start to shift culturally. And so it's sort of a fragility that's there that makes them more inclined to kind of reach out to these people that are, whether it's preachers or political leaders that are more narcissistic, more authoritarian, and that sort of thing. And I guess the final thing I'd say is, and you've implied this is really a white issue, white evangelicals. And it's, even though this is a longer conversation, there's got to be some conversation about the fact that whether it's overt or not, there's a racial element to this. And I think this is a backlash against, in some respects, against Obama, and kind of we've got our guy back in there now, and we're going to support him no matter what. Any thoughts about any of that stuff?
Well, I think this is an article I should probably write, but it's, okay, let's say Obama paid off a porn star, was caught on air saying, grab him by the whatever. I mean, you just make this list of these are all the things that Obama would have said. And you're telling me that white, like it's inconceivable, the hypocrisy that these people are showing. And
Right,
I
and
just
because
can't, I can't identify with it.
the willingness to overlook the moral stuff is and to lash out at other people who don't line up with them on that same moral stuff really makes the point that it's not about some moral authority. It's really about, is this our guy that's going to stick up for us and sort of poke his finger in the eye of the people that are different than us? And so I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, and so I mean, he is again pushing the agenda of very conservative religious beliefs.
And this may be sort of the most important moment of where Emma Kate can acknowledge that she voted for Trump and regretted it. Right?
I will openly state that I voted for not Trump.
That's not what you
not
told me
Anybody
privately. But
other
before
than
this
Trump.
podcast, you said something very different.
Well, Frank, for the record, I would never have disclosed that except for you asked. So now you know, everybody knows I did not vote for Trump.
Okay, whatever you say.
Okay,
Your
that's
secret's
fine.
safe with me
I'm
whoever's
confident
listening.
with that.
We regret to inform you that next week's podcast episode, one of our panelists unexpectedly
Murdered.
came to a demise. You guess which one was it?
No, well, but okay, I'm gonna bring in gender a little bit here. You know, with religion, there's a lot of discussion about the sanctity of marriage, and I find a lot of this stuff with Melania Trump hilarious too. I mean, some of the memes that have come out about, like, she posted something on Twitter where the beginning letter of each line spelled out help.
Oh, that was a fake,
And
by the way.
well, of course it was, but it's still hilarious because there's just so much stuff going on here. And you were talking again about how they're willing to just kind of turn this blind eye to the corruption, the betrayal, and it's nuts. All of this is nuts.
Well, if we look at around the world, I mean, even look at the Middle East and Islam, once a religion stakes claim as the dominant voice of morality and right and wrong, good or evil, it's very difficult to counterbalance that to where they lose their status and power. I think there's a lot to be said about psychology of religious extremists in terms of that they see extreme black and white thinking. It's perpetuated a lot by fear of losing status, and even viewing everyday things through a moral or supernatural lens, that there are deeper implications at bay. Like, how do you rationally argue against somebody that believes that, like, heaven and hell is at stake here? I mean, that's very difficult to break through that. And it's not something that just as a 30-something or 40-something adult that they may adhere to. If from the very moment they learn to understand and communicate, they've been indoctrinated with that very rigid type of thinking, it can be incredibly difficult to try to articulate critical thinking and rationale to permeate that wall.
Right. And it blows my mind about some of the stuff that's coming out with the immigrants and separating children from their parents. And that's a whole nother podcast.
I mean, do they not remember Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were immigrants traveling for the census?
Right.
It's just a bunch of foreigners, I tell you. That's all it is. Gotta kick them out.
So helpful, Frank.
Oh, the true Frank has come out.
So helpful. Oh, my gosh.
And, some of, not quite that point, but some lately there's been on the evangelical side, books and articles written about how Trump is this parallel of kind of a corrupt king that God had his hand on, or that God picked Trump despite all odds to usher in this sort of new era, and that the things that are happening in the Middle East, that he's got his hand in all that. And so, obviously that kind of bad theology is bad on its own terms, but what I would argue is the reason why that's being attributed to Trump is for the reasons we just talked about. It's not the other way around. Some people would say people have bad theology and that leads them to support Trump. What I say is they have support of Trump and then they have bad theology because they're trying to make the data fit for them. Right. They're trying to say, hey, it's okay that he's an immoral guy because God used immoral kings in the past, and look what's happening. And this, and so it's kind of reverse engineered in that respect.
Yeah, if they would read the Old Testament, they might see the majority, if not all of those wicked kings did not come to a very good ending for them. Yeah. So if Trump hears that theology being used to support him, he might think twice of like, I don't know if I really want to follow that path.
Well, we could talk a lot more about this, but let's go ahead and wrap it up. And if you have questions or comments, we hope that you'll write us at feedback@shrinktank.com. All right, well, let's move on. Now, our final segment, something that we call our doctor's orders. These are things that we're personally enjoying in pop culture that we want to recommend to you. Emma Kate, do you have something?
I do. So this is an older album that I was listening to, very dramatic, haunting, sad music while I prepped for this podcast because I love Trump so much. But it is by Max Richter. It's called The Blue Notebook's 15 Years. Again, it was released in 2004. And, you know, I actually realized it was on Spotify that I discovered this. And one of the songs on there titled On the Nature of Daylight was in Shutter Island. It was also in Arrival. And I was like, oh, what is this? And then I looked into it more. And the whole album is just great. Again, it's very beautiful yet haunting music. So check it out if you want something dramatic.
And Frank.
Well, Dave, my hero and icon in life is, as you know, Howard Stern. And on the SiriusXM app, I now get to watch all of his shows. I get to see the Whack Pack. I get to see the interviews, and it's video, which makes me much happier because when his contract's up in about 2.5 years, I will still be able to stick with this app and watch my hero in perpetuity.
I'm sorry, what did you say? You get to see the Whack Pack?
Yeah.
What is the Whack Pack, Dave?
What in the world
or Frank?
Is the Whack Pack?
The Whack Pack, it's a group of people that are big fans of Howard. We've got Wendy the Slow Adult. We've got Gary the Conqueror, Jeff the Drunk. We've got High Pitch Eric, Bigfoot, Marfan Mike. Marfan Mike just got inducted into the Whack Pack last week, so I'm really excited for him.
Everything politically incorrect, correct?
Well,
right.
He's giving them sort of financial resources.
You kind of described one of my family reunions, to be honest, but nevertheless.
But moving on. Mine is a TV show that has just started back up again called American Ninja Warrior. If you recall, we interviewed the host of the show and the first winner of American Ninja Warrior and a couple of other big contestants about a year or two back. And it's back on, and there's some really cool contestants. It's a fun show, good show for everybody, for the whole family. Definitely recommend it. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. We hope you'll check out shrinktank.com for great articles and videos. You can also find links to our Doctor's Orders products on shrinktank.com. Follow us on Twitter at @shrink_tank, and we hope you'll like us on Facebook too. For questions or comments, drop us a note. Our email is feedback@shrinktank.com. Our producer and theme music composer is Sean Beck, and our associate producer and social media guru is Mariel Butler. For Emma Kate Wright, Jonathan Hedderly, and Frank Gaskell in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. Tell all your friends about us and make it a great day. Thank you. Thank you. Please. Hold, they don't call me One Take Dave for nothing. Okay, thank you all. God bless you. Help control the pet population. Have your dog or cat spayed or neutered. God bless you. Bye-bye.